Women of Power podcast is a platform for passionate and influential women who are catalysts for change, pioneers in their fields, the change makers, the trailblazers, performers and influencers, driven entrepreneurs and professionals. They play a vital role in driving economic growth and bridging the talent shortages across organizations of various scales. Building cause-based businesses to create positive impact in their communities and towards sustainable goals for the people, planet, and prosperity. In every industry, women are shattering barriers and strive to create a space where they can exhibit their achievements and motivate other women to unleash their limitless potential. We encourage collaboration, networking, and knowledge sharing among women. Let's inspire and learn from one another while sharing our valuable experiences. Thank you for joining us and listening to this episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Women of Power. The Women of Power podcast is a platform for passionate and influential women who are catalysts of change, pioneers of their field, the change makers, trailblazers, performers and influencers, and driven entrepreneurs and professionals. They play a vital role in driving economic growth and bridging talent shortages across the organization of various scales. Building cause-based businesses to create positive impact in their communities and towards sustainable goals for people, planet, and prosperity. As we strive more for women leaders, we find so often that women have been already playing a huge role. And today, my guest has an outstanding background, Dr. Ugoji Eze. She is Barrister-at-Law in the Honorable Societies of Grace in the UK. Barrister Eze is skilled producer of events and programs at the United Nations headquarters in New York, who speaks on U.S. national and cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data privacy, and Barrister Eze recently conceptualized and moderated a virtual high-level meeting in the United Nations in New York on building back better, risk-informed COVID-19 recovery and rehab, and strengthening resilience to climate change, related disasters in Africa and the Caribbean. Very important topics. The list goes on and on. Barrister Eze moderated two high-level panels discussions on strengthening resilience and sustaining development, a humanitarian approach to leaving no one behind. And this was organized by Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management, and Social Development, Nigeria, and Food Security Response, combating illicit financial flows and security asset returns for sustainable development. Wow. As I mentioned, list goes on and on. Another one I want to mention is she had another high-level event she hosted at a permanent mission of Malawi, the United Nations. Now, this one was towards closing the gender gap in science, technology, and innovation in developing countries. I am so proud to share that Barrister Eze is an author on national security, and her recent book is Reaffirming US Commitment to Refugees, a challenge to security and engagement. And finally, I would allow her to share more, but I want to bring one more event. She also makes a presentation on the third session on artificial intelligence and emerging continental legal practice. List goes on and on. I welcome Dr. Eze.
Oh, thank
Welcome
you so much.
to the show. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Huge thank you, Ritu, for inviting me. I am deeply honored to be here today and to participate. Thank you so much.
You are truly a woman of power. I had just mentioned just a fraction of your accomplishments here. So please tell us a little bit more. What brings you here to this journey? And given your outstanding background, tell us a little bit more.
Thank you so much. Well, my journey began over 64 years ago in London. I was actually born in London
Mhm.
of a Nigerian father and a Cuban mother. And my journey was sort of marked by the civil war in Nigeria. I'm actually a refugee. And I believe that being a child refugee motivated me to always strive for the best, to always go above and beyond. Um, that's how my journey really started. As being born in London, went to Nigeria when I was 1 year old in 1960, and by 1967 we were fleeing as refugees, and we had asylum in Portugal, Lisbon, Portugal. We lived there for a while, and from there we went straight to London. So that's how my journey began, and I can assure you it wasn't an easy journey, especially being a refugee child. The discrimination, the stigma, it made me, it installed in me this desire always to go for the best, always to go above and beyond, not to be categorized. It's so easy to categorize people as refugees. You do not expect much from them. And it still goes on today when you think about the global refugee crisis, the movement of migrants across borders, and also internally displaced persons. So arriving in London in the 60s and facing a lot of discrimination for being a refugee, it installed in me a desire to achieve, a desire to make sure that I left my footprints in the sand.
You have done an outstanding work. Have come across a few refugees, and most of them women, and each one brings a ton of talent. And it's just hard to believe, as you said, the desire to achieve and excel, and in your words, as you say, leave footprints. Given that enormous challenges, being totally disrupted in early childhood, in forming years, developing not only emotionally, intellectually, in education, in all aspects, with all so many different insecurities, I can only imagine how difficult that can be. People like you set wonderful examples for others to follow. Not only that, not only just the footprint and examples to follow, but what you have accomplished is in real time, is helping so many people. You bring that vision out in the front, in practice, in motion. So, as I was going to ask you, and it just a very good segue for my first question, is your journey explains it. Why do you advocate for refugees?
Because I was a refugee myself, I was a child refugee. So I really know, um, I've walked in those shoes. I know what it is to be a refugee.
Mhm.
I know what it is to have a war or civil unrest disrupt your education. I know also the psychological impact of being a child refugee. Um, as you say, your formative years have actually been disrupted. I remember not going to school for 2 years. It's impacted my writing. I don't write very well. I know what it is to be left behind, not to have a normal, if there's such a thing as a normal childhood. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a fervent advocate at the United Nations for refugees, more particularly refugee children. So when I watch the television and see ongoing conflicts, be it in Syria,
Mhm.
be it in Afghanistan, be it anywhere in Africa, and also the recent crisis in Ukraine, when I
Yeah.
see the children, I can empathize with them. I can relate to what they're going through. When I hear the sirens go off, when I hear the planes flying through, I've been through that myself. I've had sleepless nights as a child refugee when we had to wake up in the night as soon as the planes were going over our house and go and shelter in air raid shelters. And also, I know what it is, despite the fact that our house had a Red Cross sign on it, because my late mother was a nursing matron of a hospital during the war. Planes still tried to, planes did bomb us, they bombed the school. So it makes me be very fervent
Mhm.
when I see United Nations Security Council resolutions on ensuring that schools, hospitals should not be that should have a no-fly zone in them. I have been through that, so I understand, and I fervently advocate for that to ensure that hospitals, schools are no-fly zones.
But it is schools, hospitals, it's part of a community, a residential area,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
right? They're not outside of the residential areas
Mm,
or
mm,
outskirts of the borders, etc. So
mm.
um, residents are at risk as well.
Oh,
In,
absolutely, yeah,
right?
yeah. We
So
can call them because the Security Council has a responsibility to protect. That includes civilians. You
mhm,
know that civilians should not be targets of wars. They should not be what we call in the international community collateral damage. We live in a world now where we have advanced technology. We have drones flying over the regions, flying over conflict zones. The question which one has to ask is how far are civilians, and that includes women, children, and men, how far are they collateral damage? We just have to turn onto the TV today and we see what is going on in the Middle East. We find that children and women, they are the victims of war. They suffer, they bear the brunt of wars.
yes, they do. Civilians are the casualties. And
Yeah.
you said that women and children, elders,
Mm-hmm.
elderly people who are left behind, and young men and men, able men are fighting the war. So everyone in a society becomes a casualty.
Mm-hmm.
People's life was disrupted, their livelihoods are disrupted. It's a chaotic world. The war zone itself is.
Mm-hmm.
And recently, I had a conversation with someone, and we were talking about the peace talks. And it's just the peace talks was
Mm-hmm.
just kind of sounds like a talk. There
Mm-hmm.
are wars in the names of peace, and it never makes any sense to me. And I try to explore the answers within, and what drives these kind of
Mm-hmm.
decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I don't have answers. And anyway, I want to bring my conversation back to you with all of the different type of work you are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Really inspires you and motivates you.
Well, what really inspires me and indeed motivates me is this desire to be a change maker, to make a difference
Mhm.
in the world, and above all, a difference in a life of a child. There's a Hebrew saying that when you touch one life, you touch a whole generation. And I sincerely hope that I'm touching at least one life.
Oh, you're doing a lot more. I admire your strength, and I admire what you have already accomplished and capable of accomplishing. And I want to go on and on, but I just want to kind of keep my focus on some discussion that I want to have today is that with you and I both are have a similar background on the cybersecurity, data privacy, human rights, and most recently the AI, how it's making a difference. There are a lot of the positive aspects of artificial intelligence when it comes to the medical industry and some other areas. And yes, it can do for environment and so many other things. But as generative AI has been discussed to the government level, the highest the offices of the government level, that how disruptive it can be and is going to disrupt a lot. So we can have a conversation go all over the place on those. I just want to ask you, it's a two-part question. Is that ongoing situation of women and girls in a conflict zone? And with your background and the work you do with the United Nations, do you think that AI can make any difference in the lives of women and girls in war zones?
Artificial intelligence is really the current buzzword, but we have to realize the disadvantages, the dangers of artificial intelligence. I, for one, believe that artificial intelligence can be a threat to international peace and security. By that, I mean that there needs to be a controlling mechanism of artificial intelligence. There needs to be laws, international set of rules and regulations as regards artificial intelligence. We're facing or we're entering a new realm, which is an unknown realm. I don't really believe it's to any advantage of women and girls in conflict zones. We may have the modern technology, but it begs the question, how far is it impacting women, girls, and indeed human beings in war zones? Yes, we have the advanced technology. We can pick up information and intelligence, but is it really helping in conflict zone? Is it really protecting the human rights of women and children in war zones? I believe there needs to be guardrails as regards artificial intelligence. There need to be a concrete set of international community rules and laws, which every member state has said, but right now we have a long way to go.
Absolutely. There are no ethical bodies or governing bodies in place. There's a lot of
Yes.
need. And have spoken to quite a few experts on AI that agree upon the AI is more dangerous at the moment we are speaking. It's more dangerous that is going to be productive for a human development, or especially the younger generation, is dependency on technology for and developmental years, etc. So is there are a lot more dangers as it's growing without any constraints and guidelines and any ethics and governance. Um, and quite often I hear that the AI, the algorithms, they are can be very biased towards
Oh
certain
yes, yeah.
right. So, and with us, when we are talking about women and girls in a conflict zone, and AI, um, even if it's going to benefit, if there is a sort of bias in presenting the information and data, uh, it doesn't seem like it's going to be much of a help. At the time we're discussing this topic, a few years from now, I do not know. But I think it is an infant that's left out to grow on its own without much supervision at the moment.
Oh yes, yeah.
right?
It's a bit like the Wild West, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's quite a
The
bit of
Wild West of AI.
yes, yes. So this is a very interesting conversation when it comes to women and children in conflict zone. What do you feel as your work involves is the position of children in war zones, but as their safety, their education, the early forming years?
I think I for one believe that there have been changes, there have been advances regarding the protection of children in conflict zones. Um, the United Nations organization UNICEF
Hmm.
has done a lot for
Okay.
children in war zones. I remember, I believe it was in 2010, I hosted an event on the psychological impact of war in children in war zones, and I took into consideration the education
Hmm.
or lack of education for children in war zone, and I invited UNICEF to join the discussion. I remember that particular point in time, UNICEF had not done anything in war zones as regards the education of
Hmm.
children. Also, UNHCR. Whilst on the one hand, a lot has been done since for the past 10, 12 years, um, I believe there's still a lot more needs to be done for children in war zones, particularly their education and also the psychological impact of war. There's so much emphasis on creating, getting on the ground, which the United Nations does, setting up camps, setting up a refugee camp, and basically leaving women and children to get on with it. What is the impact of war on the education of children? The impact is that you're going to have a whole generation which has been left behind. They're not going to catch up with their education. They're missing their education. And also, there needs to be more emphasis on the psychological impact, the psychological treatment of children in war zones. Because I remember being in a war zone in Biafra. I'm a Biafran refugee, being flown out on a plane in the middle of the night to San Tome in Africa, which allowed us to land to fuel, and then being flown to Lisbon and living in Lisbon for a while. Nobody asked us, so nobody asked me, how do I feel? That's a question you need to ask a child. How do you feel? If you were to ask me that question, if I was to go back to being a 7-year-old child, the first thing I would say to you is, I wish the noise, the airplanes will not keep flying over the house. You'd look up to the sky and you suddenly see a silver sliver of a plane flying over. Then you'll hear the bomb. And I'll also say to you, I wish I would not hear the shell, because we were suffering from shell shock. I wish I could go out to play with my friends. I wish we didn't always have to be afraid. We
Hmm.
didn't always have to be feeling very tense. You're waiting to hear that crash. You're waiting to hear the plane flying over. You're waiting to be taken into an air raid shelter. There needs to be a tremendous amount of work on the psychological impact of war on children. When I see the children now of Ukraine, the children then of Afghanistan, the children of Syria, when you see the fear in their eyes, even in Gaza, you see the fear in their eyes, and even in Israel, you have to ask yourself, what can we do for these children?
It breaks my heart when things happen to children because they are so vulnerable.
Mm,
And even though elderly population, they are vulnerable, but they're adults, they can comprehend and make sense of the things and may have the emotional strength. But
mm-hmm,
child is innocent.
mm,
Child is extremely vulnerable to these kind of traumatic events that's going to live with them
mm.
for rest of their lives,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some may not get forget them. It
Mm,
might become part of their embedded psyche.
mm,
So it's a very difficult to describe for me. and especially to speak for children who are facing that. I do not have the right words to say what they go through. I can only, in our conversation, I can only see that how traumatic it would be for them for decades, right? So, do you think international community is doing enough to protect the rights of civilians in war zones?
You only have to look and see what's happening right now in the Middle East, and that basically could answer the question. I for one, do not believe they're doing enough to protect the rights of civilians in war zones. One only has to turn on the television or see on social media to see to witness the tremendous suffering which is going on, and diplomacy and is basically failing.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
However, my personal opinion here is that even if we turn on TV or social media, we don't get the real picture of what's going on.
Well, I think it believes. I think it depends where you're getting the news. I for one tend to realize news from London. You know, I didn't plug it, but I watch Sky News, and you basically have it on real time what is going on. I find the US media doesn't really tell you exactly what is going on. You know, we have to, I feel that we have to look outside, you know, outside our walls to get different versions of the news. I watch Sky News, I watch the BBC, I watch Al Arabiya, I watch Al Jazeera to get a different perspective of what
Different
exactly,
perspective.
and
Correct.
also Deutsche Direct to get a different perspective of what is going on.
Yes, I agree.
Then,
I
yeah.
agree. To get this different perspective opens up your eyes to see and your thought process.
Oh,
Then you
yes, absolutely.
realize that there's
Yeah.
you know, and sitting in our living rooms in front of our TV sets, we have our decision making, our discretion as well. We don't have to go too far to take the news just to change channels, etc. So that's very interesting. I want to ask you a couple of more questions based on the work you have done, and then I would switch a little bit on your personal uh, uh, work that outside of United Nations that your areas of interest. So let me ask you on the gender equality. Share your thoughts.
Well, to me, gender equality, when you hear the word gender equality, everybody always thinks is women's rights. It isn't. Gender, to me, it means both women and men. And in this age which we're in the 21st century, I believe gender equality needs to be actively balanced. You cannot have women who are highly educated and at the same time leave men behind. By gender equality, you need to lift off both men and women. And I believe a direct result of the consequences of pushing forward the gender perspective for women and leaving the men behind and creating this unequal balance. It is, I believe, it can result in violence against women.
Yes.
Majority of men feel extremely threatened when you have highly educated women, and they feel they're not needed in society. So I believe you need to lift them both up gently at the same level, the same scale. If you educate a woman, you must educate a man to the same level. And above all, you must bring the men into the women arena to have discussions,
Yes.
to synthesize everybody, to be on the same page. Men have to take part in that discussion. They have to be in the boardroom. They have to feel, well, to put it quite bluntly, they have to feel they're wanted. Because you have these high-pied women who are basically moving forward and you're leaving the men behind. That causes a lot of problems, I believe, in society.
At a domestic level, yes, it does.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
As a family level, yes, it does. The yeah, as the male
Mm.
ego part and all of that
Yeah, yeah.
kind of gets challenged,
And
and
also on a social level as
it,
well.
correct.
Yeah.
And I think instead of having that gender equality
Mhm.
conversation, is just bringing harmony to the conversation
Okay.
and bringing more of a uh, um, collaborative approach, as I say,
Mm.
to the
Mhm.
conversation is needed, even though women are contributing to GDP of the nations, of their societies and countries, being educated a lot. The need
Mhm.
was for this, if we step back 50 to 70 years ago, when women were not as heavily part of the paid workforce,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
the treatment at
Mm.
home, the raising of the family, raising of the children, taking care of the household responsibility, and then still the gender violence was still there, right?
Mhm.
So when they are coming forward to take care of themselves, and we see that the gender violence hasn't gone away, just because women are educated and producing and contributing to the family's income. So there is more of a conversation is needed, more harmonious and collaborative approach is needed, and having the gender equality policies in black and white out
Yeah,
there.
but gender violence or violence against women has always been there.
Yes,
But 30, 40, 50 years ago, it was something that happened behind closed doors and nobody spoke about it. There was a
yes.
stigma attached to it.
Mhm.
But with the evolution of time and when most women are more progressive, they're coming out, there's no longer stigma attached to it. I mean, you have the Me Too movement now. We have the time of women's lib on all those movements which are up and coming. It no longer has a social stigma attached to it.
Yes, I agree. The social stigma of that domestic violence is no longer a
Mm.
as a hush hush and kept behind the doors
Yeah, it's no
anymore.
longer behind closed doors, and you're
Yeah,
not prepared to come out and speak about it. It no
yes,
longer has a taboo about it anymore.
exactly. And something that I quickly share with you is the documentaries I have done on the gender-based violence. Men who are victim of
Oh
domestic
yeah.
violence also, and the data which was available at that time of my filming was that most men experience violence from another men than women. So it was pretty interesting aspects of my research at the time. But anyway, I want to bring back our conversation here
Mhm.
is that I know we had this conversation, and you had mentioned about the 65th anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Is it a time to celebrate?
Um, sorry, it's actually the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. Um, I do not
Sorry,
believe,
yes. Mhm,
yeah, I do not believe it's a time to celebrate because when we look around all over the world in the global community,
mhm.
global world, there really is not much to celebrate because the human rights of human beings, I'm going to say, are being violated on a daily basis. So it really begs the question, do human rights exist? Is it just lip service being paid to human rights? And above all, what are we celebrating? When we look in conflict zones where we see the rights of women and children being violated, you ask yourself, do they really have rights? You take the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which recently celebrated its anniversary in November, and yet at the same time, you look to Syria, you look to the Middle East, you look to Africa, you look to Asia, and the rights of the child are being violated.
Mhm.
And I believe the international community is not doing enough to enforce these international laws and treaties. As a matter of fact, the majority of the countries, and I'm not going to name names, are not actually signatories to these international conventions. So, as we're entering the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it begs the question, what is there to celebrate?
I hear you. I hear you. I wish that this gets heard um, by more and more people who have interest these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as there's more and more child labor, it hasn't gone away.
Mm-hmm.
The global health, children, and poverty, and sometimes it just takes few cents for essential medication injection
Mm-hmm.
or vitamins for they're vital for their growth in their first 2, 3, 4 years
And
of
there's so much inequality.
it's
There's so much inequality in health,
yes.
education,
Mhm.
you know, work. There's so much inequality in the world. So it really begs the question: what are we celebrating for this anniversary? When we look out all over the world,
Mhm.
there's so much inequality. We've recently come through the COVID-19 pandemic. There was inequality in the distribution of the COVID
And
vaccine.
it's children right. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just my thought process went into completely different direction. Um, I had done some work with nonprofits on the boards and as a volunteers, and parents who have drug addictions,
Mm,
their children, what they are exposed to. Um, so they might be living into right here in United States or in a well-off societies,
obviously, yes.
right? Is that children is being exposed to very
Mm,
unhealthy situations.
mm,
um, Child abuse
mm,
remains a big issue as well, and it doesn't have to be reputed children.
mm.
It can be anywhere. um, there are human trafficking and other issues that they where children become um, victims. So there's a lot more, just not having a good health education or healthy circumstances in their forming years, even into healthy societies, so to speak. Children are exposed to a lot. So I always wonder about that, when we talk about children's right or human rights, where does it start and where does it end?
Yeah,
And
that's a very good point. And also, if I can take you back to conflict zones,
mhm,
there's a recent trend of children being weapons of war in conflict zones. We saw the proliferation of child soldiers.
yes.
Children are being used as weapons of war. We only have to look to the situation now in the Middle East or even in Africa, the tremendous suffering which children go through. So I, for one, believe that there's an emerging phenomenon of children being weapons of war, just as women, the issue of rape as a tool of war for women. We've recently seen it as the international community appears to be very silent on that. Um, the rape and the violation of the Israeli women during this conflict. Most international organizations, UNICEF, UN Women, it took them a long time to come out and speak against it. But we have to also remember and be aware of the phenomenon of rape being a tool of war, weapon of war, which is a phenomenon which has been emerging. It basically, it's gone on for a long time, but it emerged during the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it's recently occurred in Israel. So globally all around the world, we're seeing emerging phenomenons of women being used as a tool of war. Also children, the phenomenon of the child soldier. And the child soldier, when you think of child soldiers, everybody thinks of the male child soldier, but there were a lot of female child soldiers. I did a program at the UN on female child soldiers.
Really?
So we have to sort of sit back, ask ourselves, what can we do as
And
human
these
beings? What
things,
can we do?
we don't hear that in our mainstream
No, you
news,
don't. Yeah, you don't.
right? And people are so unaware of such issues, right? It's not that people don't have heart or they don't care about issues. It's just that there is lack of awareness of these issues.
No, I also think of, obviously, I'm from Europe. I also think that here in the United States, people tend to look within. They don't look outside the borders. That's why they're really not aware of what is going on outside, and in some cases, they don't want to be aware of it. I've had conversations with some people, and they've said to me they really don't want to upset themselves or basically to be aware of what's going on outside the
Mhm.
United States. I've had some conversations with women, and some even confess to me or say to me they don't even watch the TV. It's too depressing. Now,
I
how do we live
agree.
in a
It
society
can
like
be, it can
that?
be depressing.
Mm,
I agree. And then as a coping mechanism too, when you already have your stressful lives, the cost of living, keeping up with the job stress, family stress, and
mm,
then to add to that, the outside
mm,
stress becomes sort of unwanted, right? So I can understand that, but awareness of uh, having, as we are right now in a fourth industrial revolution in a
mm,
global economy, what
mm.
happens in one country, it very well may impact on the other side of the
Oh yeah,
border,
because
right?
we live in. I always say we live in a global village.
We are in a global village,
Yes, yes.
global health. We are
Mm,
in a global economy. We are in digital
mm,
economy. We are
mm,
an interdependent economy. And with AI, within a collaborative platform,
mm,
um, uh, companies can find talent to produce their work, etc.,
mm.
anywhere on the globe, as long as you can learn how to process that, you know, application or do the work. So you could do it in such an economy, not understanding how our lives at a local level can be impacted with global issues. I think there's a big learning curve here, for most of us. Anyway, I want to be. I could talk to you for
Mhm.
hours. There's so much information, and I am so
Yeah, but could
impressed.
I say something from what you just
Absolutely.
said last? Um, although we live, as I say, although we live in a global village, and although in some areas people are isolated, we have to realize with the advance of technology that what happens in one region, one area of the world, does impact us. We can't sort of shut ourselves up and say it doesn't impact us. It does. Ongoing crises, conflicts, the direct result will be the movement of people, refugee crisis. People are moving across borders. So we can't really sort of sit in our comfort zone and say, oh, it doesn't really impact me. It does. You just have to look on the streets of New York, look at some of the hotels. There are a lot of refugees have come across the border. So we can't really say it's not, it has nothing to do with me. It doesn't impact
Um,
me. It does indirectly.
and refugees, when they are constrained in a location without, I'm sure that they're given basic necessities and resources, but they do not have the um, assimilation into the culture, and there's just so much stigma, and it's just like issues grow, they don't go away, they just linger around for a longer than we are ready to believe. um so these are the I'm sure, as you are just the right person, as being so much involved in the United Nations, so different events that you host, and the track record of it. There is ongoing um, need of awareness, so to speak. If we can't finish one initiative, it is there's a spiral effect from one thing to another, on a
Oh
global.
yes, there's always, as I always say, there's always a conflict emerging somewhere in the world.
It is.
We were dealing with or being aware of what was happening in Ukraine and the Russian Federation. Then we switched towards the Middle East.
And we had
But
just gone through the
we forget, we tend to forget
Mhm.
the Syrian conflict. The war in Syria has been going on
Yeah.
for nearly over 12 years now. So it's an evolving world that we live in.
It is. It is. And there's a lot more that, does not really surface at the top, given that bigger issues around us. Let's switch our conversation a little bit. Your interest in planet Earth and SDGs. Give me a little bit of the good news here. What's
Good news. Um,
uh,
I have to laugh because I'm thinking to myself, what good news? You know, I'm thinking to myself, what good news? What good news is there? I think the good news we could say is that we're going into 2024, and we have to be optimistic that some of the conflicts will die down. Some of them will have resolutions to the conflicts. Um, we have to be very optimistic on the rights of the child, and also we have to be grateful in a way that we've come through the COVID-19, the global pandemic.
yes.
We're taking it for granted that both of us are now interacting and being very cheerful, because I mean about 2 years ago it was we were in lockdown, and
Yes.
it may seem a long time ago. So that is in some respect an
Yeah.
aspect of good news that we're
Um,
here to talk about it, and we've come through it.
medical community has given us quite a bit at the expedited speed. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of things to be grateful, thankful. Technology excelled to give that interaction without being in person. So altogether, we learned globally, as a global society, we learn a lot of lessons, and sometimes I feel that we have forgotten it very quickly as well. Some lessons.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I think we have, and also it taught us that there's a need for pandemic response, how to respond. I think
mhm,
we learned from the COVID-19 that there's a need to be able to respond to future pandemics, and also that we live in a global village, that we were all in it together.
I did some research on that in my recent book on women leadership in 21st century and the global health. This topic was really taking a lot in my mind. I did research on that. Um, uh, it is. We have forgotten lessons. We learned a lot. There was specifically what I was looking at. Are we prepared as a global society, a pandemic of this size, if
No,
it
we weren't prepared. Let us be realistic. We were not prepared.
not
But I believe going forward, we
Mhm.
will be prepared. A global response to prepare ourselves to
Uh-huh.
respond, and
Mhm.
also to build back better resilient community.
Yes.
I'm actually speaking next year in Minneapolis
Okay.
on the American Society of Public Administrators. I'll be speaking there, doing a panel discussion on the global health, how
Mhm.
we to build back better, how we to build back better. It's basically community preparedness and response, and above all resilience. We've learned a lot from the global COVID-19 pandemic, and we learned a lot in the
Yeah.
sense that we realized we were all in it together.
Mhm.
It didn't just impact a rich community or the global south. It's impacted also the least developed and countries and landlocked countries. We were all in it together. There was this brotherhood. There was this, community sense. You
Yes.
know,
Yes. It wasn't COVID-19 was equalizer. It didn't spare anyone, any nation, any
yeah,
culture.
it did. Yeah.
Uh, so we did learn a lot. Anyway, I want to bring it back on the good news topic, and I want to share my thoughts there. Is
Okay.
the younger generation or Gen Zers very resilient? Every generation brings a unique set of traits.
Mm, mm,
Uh, the baby boomers and generation before, every generation, the current challenges in their lifetime that they go
mm,
through, they
mm,
have the resilience to overcome
mm,
and to find ways. And I find the younger generation is very much involved with eco-friendly, planet-friendly production, and a lot of initiatives the young people are taking or support, and
mm,
even they are forcing employers to buying products and services from producers who are generating eco-friendly material. And I think this should be supported and complemented. So yeah, we are learning from our young generations quite a few things here.
mm,
Yes.
mm.
Like, anything else you would like to say as a parting words?
Um, as a parting word, I'd like to speak or just basically say an African proverb, which is Ubuntu.
Yeah.
Ubuntu means community involvement. That what impacts one person impacts the whole community, the whole village. So my parting word would be the one of the favorite saying of the late Desmond Tutu's Ubuntu. We're all in it together. We live in a global village. What impacts one person will impact another person. Though we live in a digital highway, there should still be that saying or that tradition of Ubuntu, togetherness, community, partnership.
I thank you for sharing that and saying that even when we are in a digital world, still that human decency when we meet in person should continue in digital world. Just because we are behind an avatar, it doesn't mean we can went out and shred other people.
Yes. So
So
the key word is Ubuntu, and
Ubuntu.
also be kind.
Be kind. Absolutely. Absolutely. It had been such informative, wonderful conversation. I wish you success in all your initiatives, and I am learning a lot from you too. And hopefully, we will meet again
We
for
will.
another episode. And until then, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. It's an honor. And I have enjoyed it. Thank you.
And be part of Let's Come Together movement. Together, we can recognize, celebrate, and empower women who are making a difference in today's economy. Connect with passionate and powerful women, collaborate on cause-driven businesses, and build a better future for our communities. Let's advance sustainable goals for the people, planet, and prosperity. Join the Let's Come Together movement, a private community, today and be catalyst for change in creating and raising conscious leaders of tomorrow. Thank you.